you have been opposed to the dropping of a thermonuclear weapon on Japan because of moral scruples?
Yes, I believe I would, sir.
Or did you oppose the dropping of an atomic bomb on Hiroshima because of moral scruples?
We set forth our...
No, you. I'm asking you.
I watched Oppenheimer twice, in 2 different theaters, and came away with what felt like 2 different movies. The first time was on 70mm IMAX. I caught almost everything, but I went home afterward, and I saw people complaining online about how hard the dialogue was to hear. I remember reading the comments and being a little bit confused. The second time I saw it was in an ordinary theater on a weekday afternoon. Somewhere in the middle of the security hearing scene, I found myself listening to a scene I thought I already understood. But I caught myself thinking, wait, was I actually supposed to hear that? And I still don't know which theater gave me the version Nolan actually meant. Oppenheimer spends most of its runtime taking a man apart using things he said years earlier. Private conversations are remembered either wrong or too well. Something he said in a hallway a decade earlier gets pulled into a room and turned into evidence. So when the dialogue itself becomes hard to catch here, it damages the experience of viewing the movie. None of this is new for director Christopher Nolan. People have had similar criticisms about Bane in The Dark Knight Rises, Interstellar, and Tenet. But letting a line dissolve on purpose isn't automatically a mistake. Plenty of filmmakers want you to feel something before you fully parsed it. For what feels like a very long time, the picture gets enormous and the soundtrack goes strangely empty. Just a thin, distant hush under an explosion that should be deafening. Then the shockwave finally arrives, the way it actually would for anyone standing far enough away. Nobody sits there wondering if the theater's sound cut out. We can see it happen on Cillian Murphy's face before we hear anything at all. And the silence is so clearly on purpose that you just surrender to it. I actually really love this choice. It might be the best use of withheld sound in any of his films. Proof that taking something away can really work.
But all these sounds are just meant to kind of keep us in the suspense of waiting, which stops now.
When it does go kaboom, you have been lulled into this sense of astonishment. That is all about playing contrast to get the reaction out of the audience.
The security hearing runs through most of the back half of the film, and it's nearly the opposite kind of scene. Just people going line by line through what Oppenheimer said, what he meant, what he believed, waiting to see if any of it still holds up when it's read back out loud. His own past words become evidence against him, and every so often, those words get quietly buried under the score. There's a difference between not hearing something and not knowing whether you're supposed to hear it. The first time I watched it in IMAX, I followed a stretch about an old conversation with a man clearly enough that I could have summarized it afterward. The second time in that ordinary theater, that same exchange sounded muffled, the dialogue thinning in the important places. Some of that gap comes down to how the film was actually made. Nolan tends to keep the performances captured on set rather than send actors back to re-record clean dialogue later. And a lot of Oppenheimer was shot on IMAX cameras, which run loud enough to bleed into the audio track. Quieter cameras got used for some of the heaviest dialogue scenes. And admittedly, the noise filtering technology has gotten a bit better, but neither of those fully closes the gap. Nolan has said for years that he mixes for the best theaters, not the average one. The environment he's mixing around isn't necessarily the environment most people actually experience. And a film built that way is going to sound different depending on which room you're sitting in, for reasons that have nothing to do with what the scene is actually saying. Which meant I've been trusting something without noticing I was doing it. Trusting that if a line disappeared, I probably didn't need it. Trusting that the noise was doing something clarity couldn't. Trusting that Nolan, somewhere in the mix, had already decided what I could afford to lose, and that he decided correctly. That's an easy thing to believe the first time through, sitting in a good room where most of it comes through fine. It gets a lot harder once you've heard the same scene twice, and can't be sure whether he took the sentence away or if the room did. Every unclear line afterward starts carrying a little of the same question. Missing a word by itself rarely wrecks a movie. Not knowing whether you're allowed to miss it is part of what gets tiring. The small nagging suspicion that you might be filling in a gap wrong and never finding out. And I think there's this irony sitting underneath all of this that I don't think Nolan built on purpose. The entire hearing is an argument over what a handful of remembered sentences actually meant, years after the fact, reassembled by people who weren't in the room when Oppenheimer said it the first time. His own words stop being entirely his own once people start deciding what they meant. Sitting there occasionally straining to catch the actual words, in a movie about how easily words get taken out of someone's hands, is more coincidence than statement, but it's the kind that stays with you longer than it probably should. In the hearing room, the dialogue is a meaningful conflict. The Trinity test in Oppenheimer proved Nolan can take sound away on purpose, better than almost anyone working right now. And that when he does it right, an audience will follow him into total silence without a second thought. What it can't prove is whether the theater I happen to be sitting in that night is gonna let me tell the difference. I know Nolan meant for me to miss some of it, but after 2 viewings in 2 different theaters, I'm still not always sure which parts were the ones he meant.